Good evening if you're in Australia. Good morning, I guess. If you're in the UK, Peter Birch here with Dr. James Somauroo. We're doing Health Tech live across LinkedIn and YouTube here in kind of mid-July. G'day, James. How you going?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. That intro was quite grand, wasn't it? I actually got a bit nervous, like watching that. You know, when you record podcast and on Riverside, it does that like countdown. It's always like so intimidating, and it was like 30 seconds.
Well, you know what though?
Oh god! All of a sudden, felt like really woefully underprepared for what we're about to do because like you've just done this like animated intro.
Well, that's as much as we got, to be honest. The rest of it, we've got an hour to fill after that. But no, do you remember we did one of these a few years ago, and we had like the full on. It was like tribal drums started. Like,
yeah, I remember this.
And I'm like, so I'm feeling a bit old and like less kind of, you know, G up than that. So yeah, that one went pretty well. But if you're watching live on LinkedIn or YouTube, you can put a comment in whatever platform you're in. We'll see it on this side. I even saw Donna said g'day already, so she jumped in early. Hey Donna, but as we either end the day here in Australia or start the day in the UK, jump on, let's have a chat, because we're talking about everything health tech related. Oh, Roy, there we go, the accent. I'm putting it extra on for you, Roy, over on YouTube. So there you go. Roy can bring up a lot of good points around clinicians being entrepreneurs and raising capital. We've done some stuff with him as well. So drop message in the chat, say hi, we'll put it up on the screen. So look, for those that, because we might have a good representation across both worlds, maybe, or maybe on YouTube, the algorithm could be doing what it's supposed to do and serving us up to people we don't know. So let me introduce myself firstly. We've got a podcast here in Australia called Talking HealthTech. It's about technology and healthcare. It's been going since 2018. We'll talk about that story in a second too. James and I were chatting about how these pods started. But so we've episode 360 goes live tomorrow. Actually, if you're on YouTube, you can catch it. We released it early today, so you can get a bit of a sneak peek for that. But James, you do your thing. What's your thing? How do you talk about yourself?
How do I talk about myself? I'm a doctor by background, anesthetics, intensive care. Did that for 5 years. I've done loads of different bits and bobs in leadership policy in the NHS here in the UK. Run a couple of health tech accelerators, so work with a load of health tech startups. And yeah, other side of my life's always been like media. So I've written for Forbes on health tech. And yeah, started the health tech podcast. We were saying like over 5 years ago, started the health tech podcast, which really sort of kicked off my network and getting to know loads of founders. I was running accelerators at the time, so I had this network of startups to go to. But yeah, then what was that? 300 odd episodes later, here we are. And now I've got Somx, which is comms, PR, content, design, all for health tech, biotech companies.
And the Pigeon.
Oh, of course. How could I forget? Health Tech Pigeon. Yeah, that's our news brand. So, weekly newsletter and weekly panel show podcast as well, talking about the health tech news.
Keeping you busy. It's I thought of this is an unformed thought, but it's kind of like what is it, like the alternate universe thing where like we followed similar paths at similar times, although you're cooler because you're actually a doctor. I'm just a dude that's worked in healthcare for 20 years. But then followed that journey from I guess kicking around doing a podcast on the side while working within the space to it becoming kind of the center of our own little universes and bringing together all these interesting stories. And now actually we're both helping brands and groups create their own kind of content
and stuff. Yeah, definitely.
So this is the journey. This is the path.
Start a podcast 5 years ago, kids. Yeah, that's the advice.
But you know what? Actually, I was started to tell you before we started, James, that the origin of the Talking Health Tech podcast actually came whilst I remember sitting on a plane that had landed. I think it was like one of those Melbourne-Sydney flights. And I was kicking around looking for podcasts in the digital health space. And I had queued up your podcast, which back then was called something slightly different. And Also Dan Kendall with his Digital
Oh
Health
yeah,
Today one as
Digital
well.
Today.
So
Yeah.
yeah, and I think I reached out to both of you, and Dan took a while to write back, but you wrote back pretty quickly. And we're like, yeah, and you were
No
only
one
like
else was messaging me back then, mate. So,
no one else was listening. Yeah, no, it was about a dozen episodes in. So yeah, that I'm like, well, at least someone's crazy enough for this idea, and it's on the other side of the world, so we can give it a crack. So yeah,
it's very kind of you to say, man. Very kind of you to say. Yeah, I don't know how many podcasts have come and gone since then, but mate, congrats for getting to 300. I mean, it's such an achievement. It's such a slog sometimes.
yeah.
Just getting that consistency, mate. I took a break from it last year for about 6 months of just recording.
How good he's actually on the line? That's even better. But you know what? I joined the Health Podcast Network shortly after that too. And I'm still a proud member. So if you are after many other podcasts on the healthcare space, the Health Podcast Network that Dan knows all about, so check that out. And there's a good bank there. I see Yoni as well is over in Australia. Got good representation across both YouTube and LinkedIn. Just a reminder that you can drop a message in the chat, and you're going to shape this conversation because James and I, we prepared a lot for the last couple of weeks for this session, of course. But,
of course we did, yeah.
Yeah, it's but we're here really to talk about what's happening within the healthcare space and technology across both sides of the globe. Look, we were kind of spitballing a few things at the start of this, James, but I'm gonna throw you under the bus first and say for you to kick off, because there was a few things happening on your side of the world that look pretty interesting, and usually you've got some pretty cool stuff to share around capital investment and funds. Maybe we start there.
Yeah, sure, man. I put a LinkedIn post out, I think it was yesterday or the day before. I was reading Rock Health's newsletter, but which, by the way, was the inspiration for HealthTech Pigeon, because I used to read Rock Health's newsletter and it was like super short, super easy to read. And I was like, oh, we need this for the UK. And that's actually how HealthTech Pigeon started. But yeah, I was having a look at it, and they've done their report, and I'm not going to pretend that I'm some sort of financial analyst, but this graph has some lines that go up and down, and this is the number of deals that are done per year in the US. And it's one of them, man. You can see the COVID bubble. You can see what happened 2021. All the generalist investors flood in. Healthcare becomes really cool to invest in. Health tech becomes really cool to invest in. Loads of deals are done. The valuations are super high. So that left line is bigger than the right line, I think, is along those lines for analysis. I think that's about right.
That's about right.
And yeah, the valuations have come down, but the deal numbers come down. Like the big thing for me here is if you look at that number of how many deals were done in the first half of 2023, it's low. I don't know, if you double it, it's still going to be probably where we were in 2020, but it is just to show that, like, yeah, health tech investments are going down. VCs are holding onto their money. People are going to other places for capital. I think you mentioned this before, going to more grants and angel investors. And there was another thing in this newsletter actually that hit me. I'm working communications, right? We're in the comms game, and obviously we've got startups that are doing raises and stuff. They're super proud to raise if they're raising right now, and they managed to do it. But so many deals are unlabeled at the moment, so startups are not keen to say seed, Series A plus, or all these weird things that they come up with. That they're just not saying it. So I think it was like over half of the deals are just like not being labeled because they're down rounds, like the valuations are dropping, or they've raised less than they did even in the previous, and they're trying to top up and all this sort of thing. So yeah, it's just an interesting time. I think people are just holding on to their capital. All their runways are trying to extend. We're seeing it on the Somx side. People are trying to extend their runways and looking at where they can make cuts, and also people are coming down from bigger agencies to us because they want to spend less money and get more done. And so, yeah, it's strange times. Times in space.
Well, and look, on that point that you mentioned earlier about alternative sources of funding, I'm just pulling it up here to see if I can be super clever and share another screen. But the And Health here in Australia released a report only today. It was live. See how I slow down my speech as I'm finding the right but and that's not the best slide to share, but there's their industry sentiment survey, and that they've done every year because they've got a good database of I guess, organizations here in Australia that they work with. But there's a lot of good graphs in here. But in particular, I may not find the slide, but I'll encourage anyone to go find it. If you're looking to understand a bit more about what's happening in the Australian space, particularly what the sentiment is from digital health companies, basically 90% of organizations are looking to hire, so actively grow in terms of their team and resources. However, most are not looking to source funding from the typical kind of means of investment. So that was a bit close. The typical sorts of means of investment. So they're looking to access grants instead, or utilize accelerators and incubators, which I guess is I remember starting the Talking HealthTech podcast 5 years ago. That one of the main drivers of doing that was, it felt like here at least in New South Wales in Australia, the only real kind of additional assistance you could get outside of raising money was like doing R&D tax credits, like research and development tax credits from the government, and there's no real kind of, or you had to be really tricky and work out how you'd fit into like a more generalist startup program. But these days there's some great programs, some that I'm a part of and others that exist too. And actually, there's some, so Roy was a participant in AusSet cohort 1 and could totally be a mentor now, by the way. But as he said, there's the pre-seed and seed funding in digital health have remained somewhat static, but big reductions in later rounds as well. So just generally across the board, feeling the pinch. G'day from Queensland, from Michael. I didn't watch the State of Origin, Aussies. That's I don't think you're supposed to say that if you're an Australian, but Michael, let me know if Queensland won or if New South Wales did. We got Sydney as well. Claire's here as well. That's just what happens on a live, I guess. But the good thing is, on this session is recorded as well for those that want to jump back and catch it. If we feel like there's any good snippets that come out of it, we might push it back through either of our platforms. Just speaking about the larger organizations too, like the later rounds of funding, it reminded me that in the UK, larger organization, or globally, larger organizations are feeling the pinch as well. There's the bit around Babylon that happened recently. That was a bit of
God, man, honestly, that's been pretty big news here in the UK. Like IPOing, albeit via SPAC. That's a phrase that you use if you don't know much, but you know a little bit.
What people say these days.
That's a way of IPOing.
Yeah.
It's not the traditional way through another company that's already IPO'd or something along those lines.
I read it in a Substack. It's fine. That's what they say.
Yeah. Now I'm regurgitating it as if I know what it means. IPO'd via SPAC, but then they got like delisted. Shareholder value just got wiped. And this is the thing, like it's dark for like the everyone that worked there, that worked super hard, that probably took reductions in salary for equity or whatever. Like it's just tough for the people that work there that have contributed to that company. But I feel like I remember going to Babylon's very first office when I was just leaving medicine and exploring sort of startups and accelerators, and I was chatting to loads of different people. And what my previous registrar worked at Babylon in the super early days, and so he invited me to the office. And I think, honest to God, I think there's like 12 of them in there. It was like super small at the time. And I feel like ever since then, on my sort of health tech journey and digital health journey, Babylon's always been there. And it's always been there as this like super forward, like swashbuckling through like regulation and regulators trying to catch it behind. But they were carving this path through digital health. And they were the first people that I knew that, Ali at the time was the first person I knew that was saying like, can a computer be a doctor? But saying it like legit and trying to build this company around it. And they went to the telemedicine thing, and they were doing the AI thing, and they were like pushing all of these boundaries and sort of creating what feels to me like they were creating what we have now. And with them all like going now, I sort of feel a bit like I did when Federer retired from tennis. I'm just a bit like, hold on a minute, I've only ever known tennis with Federer around. Like suddenly became very aware of my own mortality, of just like, oh God, everything ends. Like now I've got to do digital health out of Babylon here. Like what? Like they're the one that you always talk about. They're the ones always in the media. So yeah, it's a weird one. Like a lot, just I feel sad for like that whole story. And I don't know the ins and outs of it by any means, but like, yeah, it's a strange one.
You want innovation to win, right? And
this is the thing.
And there's, we talk about how, we need to do healthcare differently, and organizations that rate, sell the dream and win the hearts and minds and rally the team behind it. They need a lot of money to be able to do that, but it's a long runway to get to a point that keeps it cash positive. So
I think as
hard.
well, I think it's a really good phrase. We want innovation to win. I love that. I'm going to steal that and use that as if it's my own. I
totally just made it up, so you can have it though. I got more where that came from.
Yeah, well, fantastic. Let's keep talking. But I think innovation has won because of them, but for ways that they'll never know. I think there were people that have been inspired by that, inspired by what has been said on stage, albeit, I know there's regulatory issues with things that were said and all the rest of it by certain people, but I think what they have managed to do in terms of showing people the art of the possible. Can you imagine trying to pitch the idea of what they wanted to do with Babylon at that time, and how many times they'll have been told that is absolutely ludicrous?
Many knows.
Yeah. And achieving what they did achieve over time. Whether or not you agree or disagree or like or dislike or whatever, the fact is that company has just plowed through so much in terms of policy, regulation, innovation, whatever you want to call it. And I think inspired quite a lot of people to do quite a lot in health tech, and actually regulators have had to catch up behind. The whole telemedicine thing seems to have come out of all that stuff. And I think there's a lot for that team to be proud of, despite how it has ended.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. And I can think of many organizations, that have followed that path. I think of Eucalyptus here in Australia that actually that reminded me recently that, because do you have Jenny Craig in the UK, the weight loss thing? I think you
maybe not my space.
Not your space. Jenny Craig, the weight loss, direct consumer weight loss type program was big in Australia for a long time. I think it's global. It's out of the US, and they, I think they've either shut up shop completely in Australia or sold off a lot of assets, which was a pretty big deal for those that were kind of in that space. And so Eucalyptus, who are a health tech company, they've got a few different brands, and they do the telehealth kind of services, and one of those is Juniper, their weight loss thing. So they picked up all the online assets of Jenny Craig and kept that kind of going too. So it's I guess there are, and I think of this point too that Samir mentioned as well, that the investment into the larger scales that might have shrunk investment into the early ones. I don't know, maybe, but hopefully there are organizations that can still keep a little bit of powder dry, and I guess investors are probably doing that too, meaning they've, for the right opportunity that presents in through all this chaos of companies closing or shutting down. I think of another example of First Group here in Australia that was an online appointment booking system, and they did really well in the allied health side from memory, but they had a number of changes within the group, and then it was basically a fire sale, and then another company, HealthShare, picked them up and just got the assets and ran it through. That was widely reported here. So I guess
Pear Therapeutics is similar as well.
of course,
those assets being sold, and again, I think I saw this in Rock Health's report or another one of their articles, but one thing that is happening is where these things are going down, the assets are being divided, but there is going to be relaunch of this stuff. There is going to be IP that turns up somewhere else in a different way. And actually, what was it that we said the other day in Pigeon? Failure is a type of exit. It's not the end of the world.
Yeah. That's true. G'day to with LinkedIn. I think you have to give some approval to put your name up there. But Health Direct, good old Health Direct, scale up members of THC Plus and big provider of telehealth services in Australia. Hello there. Just a reminder for those that might be randomly jumping onto this live. We're live, unless you're watching the recording, across YouTube and LinkedIn. You could put a message in the chat on either platform. We can read that here. You can shape this conversation. It's two dudes talking about health tech stuff, and we have podcasts, but this is the clash in the middle. We did this a couple of years ago, and we had a wheel that would kind of determine we put a few terms. I didn't get the wheel set up. I don't know why I brought that up, because I didn't bring the wheel this time. But I'm just relying on the chat to bring up some topics to discuss. We did talk a lot about the investment space in the first kind of 20 minutes of this discussion. Not everything is about raising capital. We can come back to that too. Another big thing that happened in Australia today or recently, just coming off the back of an event here called MedInfo. It's actually MedInfo is a global event, but it happened in Sydney. Great one. I was there for most of it, recording some conversations for the podcast, for the Talking HealthTech podcast. But the Australian Digital Health Agency announced their the Australian Health, I forget the exact name for it, but the Health Interoperability Plan. And it's something that, you know, everyone talks about interoperability at conferences, how we need, once we get interoperability, we'll all be out of a job because everything will be done. Me being funny, but also remarkably important that all the different systems and things talk together. So there's a plan, and I've skimmed the surface of it, and it's good to at least see that there's some deliverables in there.
Who's written the plan? Who's saying the plan?
The Australian Digital Health Agency, our agency that's responsible for everything digital health related stuff.
Okay, government funded.
So it's government.
Fine, so central. Okay, fine.
And they also look after My Health Record, which is our central place where the occasional blood test result PDF goes to die. No, in its current state.
Interesting.
In its current state. So and I think that's been well recognized, that My Health Record here in Australia, which, you know, every Australian can have a My Health Record, and the theory is that a clinician will, oh good, someone's actually posted up the link, which is handy. Apologies it didn't put your name there. Maybe it might be someone from the ADHA, but I think that was an appropriate description from my side. But the My Health Record, for those that don't know, is your personal record. However, and in theory, it's great, is that you could take your healthcare everywhere, and it's from a government point. But that relies on, you know, once you've had an appointment or some diagnostics done, like a pathology test or something, that someone actually puts it in your My Health Record, and like, so it's got to be sent from, I guess, the system or the clinician, or someone's got to push it up. We had all these issues a few years ago, concerns around privacy and do you opt in or do you opt out, and that created some kind of inertia. But also all the software providers here in Australia, they're not incentivized to make it super easy for a clinician to push stuff up, and no one you know gets in trouble if the stuff doesn't go up there into My Health Record, let alone what you actually do with it as a patient once it's there. Because if you've got a bunch of PDFs just that are sitting there, you can't really do anything with the PDFs. Like if the actual data went into fields and you could do something interesting, that'd be good. But I guess I think that's kind of that longer term idea of this plan, is that My Health Record is, you know, let's actually make it a thing that is useful for clinicians and for patients around the world. Just going back on, in the UK, you don't have a national thing, do you?
Not even close. Not even close. not even close. Which is why, like, when I hear interoperability plan that's been, you know, put out by someone central in the government, I mean, that sounds, it sounds great. As great as it can sound, you know, it's progressive. It's someone thinking, oh, there needs to be a specific plan around interoperability here. Shall we put some guidelines to make sure that some people have to conform to some standards, and then things that are made from today will be able to talk to each other, and then we can select 5 and just give everyone in the country, every trust in the country, every hospital, everything, 5 things to choose from in every category. And that's what I spoke to, actually. So Conrad, who is he's the director of the NHS Innovation Accelerator. I had him on the HealthTech Pigeon podcast talking about this, because it was 75 years of the NHS, and we wanted an NHS like guest, and he's super senior at the NHS and stuff. And he was talking about this. He was just like, why is it the case that you've got 1,000 things to choose from, and none of those companies have the incentive to speak to each other?
Yeah.
Because they all just want to be a standalone platform that does everything. So why aren't we making sure that things conform to some standard? Why aren't we just giving each organization, he said 3. He said, I want to make it so that there's just 3 things to choose from in most categories, and they're all interoperable with each other, and that's that, and that would be ideal. Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting.
You know what, though? Like, you're on... Yeah, like in terms of the theme of the report, from what I have glanced over as well for the interoperability plan, a big part of it is procurement as well. So the guidance around procurement for hospitals. I find it coming from my own experience of being a vendor. I'm also a director of the Medical Software Industry Association here in Australia as well. One thing I think of is, here in Australia, there's a couple of hundred members of the MSIA. A lot of the vendors here in Australia, they're not, they're small vendors. So if there was only three and have been encouraged for a number of years to, spin up an organization and raise capital and do all those things that we talked about at the start. And then what I do think it's great. The ADHA has been, it's taken a long time to put together a report, because there's been a lot of industry engagement with clinicians, engagement with patients. So they've done everything right as far as I can see. It's a big slog, but how do you land on something that, if you're going to narrow it down to here's a handful of things you can use, that means there's a lot of companies that you can't use. So,
yep. And the politics that will go into selecting those three.
Yeah. Hey, look, I can see it's resonating with the chat too. I can see Claire has raised that point that delays in uploading diagnostics as well. So that's something to see. G'day, Sarah. It's good to see you over in WA, and said hi to James as well. That's nice. We did have Dr. Hussein.
Oh, Junaid. Hey, man.
Look at this. And we did have a question, or a good conversation starter from Maria around what are the biggest differences in the UK and the Australian health tech space.
Health tech.
Or the tech side. So, well, I know when I start, like, working within healthcare, and then as a health tech vendor from about 2016 onwards, creating technology solutions, I used to joke that we could see what the future would be in Australia by just looking, into the US or even the UK, and then that would be what we're going to do in 2-3 years' time. And even though healthcare is already behind other industries, Australia was behind other countries in terms of implementing things. I don't think that's the case these days. And I think that was probably a little bit of a naive, perspective in my little narrow segment of technology back then. I think that, look, there's some cool innovations coming out of all parts of the world at the moment. So, in terms of the biggest differences, there's just challenges everywhere, right? That's
I think it's really similar. I think the only difference probably might be volume, might be just volume of startups, because we've got, I guess, volume of universities, and therefore the tech transfer, and then the startups that come out of all of that stuff, and then the funds. And then I suppose if you looked at the numbers, we probably do more. I don't know what that says about how successful and by percentage those numbers are, or anything like that. But if you look at the digital health exits this year, there's 0. So
wow. But you've got what's the I'm gonna put you on the spot with the UK population is
70 million.
Right.
Like
so we got 25 million, but I'm sure we've got about, I don't know the size difference geographically of how many of the UK you could fit into Australia, but it's multiple. It is multiple.
It's quite a few.
So what that means is we've got a lot of Australians living in parts of that we should technically be very good at telehealth here in Australia.
That's a good point. Your remote care must be way better, as well as your helicopter pilots, probably.
Carefully, shout out to the care flights and the RFDSs and all of those. That's we do, because there's parts of Australia that and it's hard too from a technology side. You need the capability and the funding and the resources to do that. So you'd want Medicare to actually fund for telehealth services. We can talk about My Medicare if there's any GPs in the chat. Let us know. I can see that Adam's kind of brought up a point around healthcare claiming, but the other point is that it's just hard to convince doctors to go out to rural and remote locations a lot of the time, and you can chuck a lot of money at it, but it's still, and there's all types of ways that we can, if you're a new doctor from overseas working into Australia, we can force you to work in a difficult place, but you're going to end up wanting to go somewhere else. So,
and there's more private healthcare. There's more private healthcare in Oz as well, because we're so dominated by public sector NHS. We're so dominated by that, and that makes central procurement and stuff in theory easier, but actually in practice completely not, because they're all completely independent organisations that don't they're not really incentivized around quality improvements. They're incentivized around efficiency improvements. And I know, of course, that private sector organizations want that too, but at least there's some competition, and therefore better quality service is more attractive. You can sell on that, as well as the financial gains. But also, I suppose our NHS doesn't, it's less about profit. It's more about making more go round for the people that's in it. And I think that's one of the things that came up recently. We've had this like 75 years of the NHS happen. And I think one big question that always seems to come up for me, but particularly around this, was like, in the 75 years that the NHS has existed, it has gone from being this structure that is there for free at the point of care for people that, I don't know, broke their leg, had their arm off in a machine, like this big sort of acute care organization. The expectation of what the NHS is now is like, how much is the NHS responsible for prevention? How much is it responsible for optimization? How much is it responsible for that stuff? And like mental fitness rather than mental health crises. And where do you draw the line about who should pay for that stuff? Should it be you? Should you get insurance? And that's why these other models are creeping in. And it's funny because in the UK, we talk about the NHS as public. All our healthcare is free. Like, you can use these narratives, but what about an eye test? You pay for that. What about an ear test? You pay for that. What about physio? You've always paid for that. Broadly, I know there's people that get it. So there are these things that like we have been paying for. Dentist, that's health. Like, we pay for that. So it's funny, like, just reflecting on it. But a comrade said something interesting. He said, we need to decide as a group, as a unit, as a country, like, do we want the NHS to be responsible for providing excellent care, or do we want it to be some quasi-innovation organization? Because actually the people that aren't stepping up are industry. And he's bullish on this because he's from industry. He's worked at Novartis and Pfizer and all this sort of stuff. And he's like, yeah, we're solving their pain points for them with all this innovation stuff. They should be the ones paying. He's German, and he's very proudly direct, and very proudly German, and says so himself about it.
I hadn't thought about, like, and it's
like, we're solving adherence, we're solving, like, we're solving these things for them. Like, can they give us some like resources, please?
Well, I think about, here in Australia, we've got Medicare, and that's quite different to the NHS. But the concept of healthcare is, being free for a lot of Australians is there. But to your point, I know that Medicare was brought into Australia in 1984, because that's the year that I was born, by the way. But and that's when I went to a party. It's on my LinkedIn. It's probably my most liked post. I shared it a year or two ago. There was a party that I went to, which was a dress up thing, where you had to go dressed as something that was from the year that you were born. So I made a giant Medicare card that had, like, the numbers on it, and and it was to scale and everything. And I have to re-share it on my LinkedIn. Where was I going with? Oh yeah. And so these were brought in, and they're kind of initially seen as like an insurance scheme, almost like, like it paid for the healthcare when you need it. And I don't think preventative health was that high on the list of things that was talked about back in 1984. And it's been a great success here in Australia. But everyone talks about how it needs to be, redo the fundamentals and the foundation. And I guess it's from what you learn as a population, how things shift. And yeah, you're right. If we can prevent issues arising in the first place, then that's probably where we should be spending our time. But if it's not funded, then no one's going to do it. And people don't like preventing things at a very broad sense. They prefer just deal with it when it's in the broader population. But that's some of the challenges. It's
hard to sell insurance, mate. That's why it's hard to sell insurance.
Yeah. Oh, look, we got representation from outside of the US and UK here in the chat, so that's good. Liz Keane from the ADHA with her talking about stocks. G'day, and we've got people who know each other across the space as well. Yanni's brought up Yanni in Melbourne here as well. He's bringing the US into the picture. On a scale of 1 to 10, James, how well do you rate your knowledge of the Cures Act?
11. No,
Really?
it's actually zero.
Okay.
It's actually zero. I would have to Google that. We're
Yeah.
two very honest guys here. We were talking about this
Yeah,
before, just like, on the financial graphs. Like, I'm not some sort of private equity analyst, but I can see a graph that goes up and down. That's about it. Cures Act. I'm gonna have to ask ChatGPT to summarize
well,
that for me. Is what
ChatGPT
is the workflow that I'd go down at the moment. And we can talk about large language models, but
Yeah.
um,
We went
but
35 minutes without saying large language models.
yeah, I know, right? And that's my fault. Sorry about that. The concept of this we can touch on though. So, thoughts of how the US handle interoperability versus
Yeah, I know the cues.
Okay.
So it's the forcing of like this kind of stuff. The standards are in place, and that everything it just needs to be. It's mandated interoperability. So it's kind of that just that's a very dumbed down and lame version.
So
I'm sure someone in the chat can do a better
my
version
view of that. So it's a dull topic, but this is just so important. I've noticed on my podcast recently that with the people that I've been interviewing, I've been so much more energized when people have been talking about like an infrastructure change, something that changes to move what I would describe as the adoption frontier, the frontier that exists where things can actually be used. There's a technology frontier, which is like being pushed forwards by large language models and quantum computing and all this exciting, wonderful technology, which is getting better and better and better and better. But there's an adoption frontier of like what exists infrastructure wise that allows that to be possible. So only something between here and there is actually possible. But we need to move this adoption frontier forwards, because there's no point moving the tech frontier forwards in healthcare unless this adoption. And that's things like educating people in hospitals. It's digital literacy. It's getting Wi-Fi that works in every place. It's all of this stuff that's actually going to facilitate like the teaching and understanding of what AI is and like all this stuff. Like, that's what's going to really move things. The challenges around business models, but that's where policy can come in and play a real role. And so forcing the hand of people to be companies to be interoperable with each other, tech to be interoperable with other tech. I think when it comes to something like health, which is very difficult to, well, we manage it very well in the UK, politicize, and very difficult to talk about finance and very difficult to talk about people winning and losing in a company sense with profit and these words that don't really fit with healthcare. I think actually this is where policy can play a real role. And we've seen things in the UK where policy recently has actually done what I can perceive as quite a good job. There's always going to be downsides, but things like we've had our GP contract changed in the UK to allow for way more AI assisted triage, because you can't any longer, I think with the new policy, have like the 8 a.m. rush where everyone rings at 8 in the morning to get an appointment that day. And it's just this massive rush. It's now policy to make sure that everyone is treated the same no matter what time you call in the day. So AI triage has now been opened up. So we've seen and heard from AI triage companies that, hey, we've just had loads of people calling us because the policy's changed. And it's a good example of like, yeah, again, policy can be dull, but actually policy can make a real change, because you move the market about what it needs to do and how it needs to make money, and you create new opportunities. And so, yeah, when it comes to interoperability, yeah, force their hand is what I would say. Like, yeah, get it done. And I don't know the arguments against that, but fortunately, no one's here to argue with me.
No, that's right. I think that sounds intelligent.
I would have to do more research to give a balanced argument.
To be fair, like thinking about, here in Australia, the plan from the ADHA put forward, I know there'll be perspectives either way, and we've got some good media companies here in Australia that take a much more polarizing view that we'll write about it shortly. But the and I definitely want them to do that and value that, so that we can see both sides of the conversation.
I suppose it's free market, isn't it? The argument against it of just
right.
like, why should I? Like, I don't want to live in communism and all the rest of it. But
yeah. Taking the conversation down a slippery slope, James. But we'll come back. let's not
North Korea. No.
Yeah. But you know what, the other one that I wanted to bring up was here in Australia, more in so I come from more in the outpatient side of things, so the GP land, and I know that My Medicare, which is called My Medicare, which is what do you technically call it? It's a program, or like a new model of how Medicare kind of operates here in Australia. Not completely revamped, but there's new elements to it, which kind of brings it back to what we kind of like what we used to call it here in Australia, which is healthcare homes. It's not quite the same as healthcare homes, but it's this concept of everyone's kind of got their own main GP, and I think it's more for chronic care, like not every single patient, but in terms of, the structuring the funding around like hopefully better models of care where, understanding that one patient is going to have multi-comorbid, like a number of things wrong with them rather than just one thing, and they're probably going to speak to a number of clinicians other than just their GP, who often is the one that refers it out. But managing how that's kind of funded in terms of how the doctors get paid for it, but also how it all kind of works behind the scenes doesn't quite match that. So it's to your point around policy kind of shaping how things are done and hopefully doing it in a but there's always going to be use cases that people and edge cases people are pointing out already, saying, well, how does that work in this case scenario? And I guess you need to let them run so that they have time. And actually, cheap plug, so the reason I know so much about the My Medicare thing is because it wasn't actually me who did it. I listened to a great podcast called the Medicubes podcast, and the Medicubes podcast is part of the Talking HealthTech podcast network, because we produce 5 other shows in addition to Talking HealthTech, and there are a few more that we can announce soon. And so I guess you've probably seen this as well with your show, James, that the whole point around Talking HealthTech is that it's been these trying to bring different perspectives together within healthcare. So not just the GP world speaking to the GP world, and then the health informatics speaking to them, the startup crowd talking to that, hopefully elevating it to a point where everyone can go, hey, like there's similar things that we do, or maybe we can address that. But when you do that, that's like totally against marketing 101, which is, understand the one avatar that you're speaking to. From my perspective, it's like, am I speaking to, with the podcast, the GP or the investor or all that? But I've accepted that that's a good thing, that we've got all these different points of view together. But what I like is that, the fact that we can, pump out a lot of audio podcasts in particular, and have got that machine to do that, we can then lean into, whether it's brands or whether it's other clinicians who've started their own podcast but don't have the patience and the stamina to do all the post-production. We can bring them together and then hopefully not just produce the podcast as Talking HealthTech, but also then share them with other people, because as you know as well, getting the discoverability of podcasts is pretty low. Like
I totally, man. I totally agree. I think, on that point around, it's against marketing 101. I think, there's business goal to stuff and maximizing how much you can get to make a living and all that sort of stuff. But there's also like, what are your values? Like what are your values personally? What are the values of the organization that you've put together with Talking HealthTech? And like, I think for us, one of our values or our tagline almost is to elevate health tech. We want to elevate the space. And we know from the events that we put on, what we're told is that, you get groups together that aren't normally in the same room together. And we get super nice messages of like, hey, I met so-and-so, and people have founded startups based on like being creators with us, or they've gone to events and they've like done a deal, or like whatever it is. But the point is that whilst they're in the sort of, is it a vitamin or a painkiller model, which Musty talks about on my podcast with me, of like, okay, painkillers are great, and yes, it serves a purpose and blah, blah, blah. But sometimes like, you can just be a vitamin. That's fine. You can be value add. You can be nice. You don't need to, milk the cash cow in the middle every single time. If you're just creating this nice environment and that makes you feel good, like that's also absolutely fine. Because that's going to give you the energy to go and do the thing and force your network larger and all the rest of it. So actually, like, there doesn't have to be a point to everything. There doesn't have to be this like, oh, and how are you maximizing your profit there? Like, it doesn't need to be. It just doesn't need to be that. You can just put really good people in a room that don't normally talk to each other, and you can feel good about that. Hell, you can even invest in that. Why not? Like, because you're investing in your own sort of satisfaction and happiness there. So I think that's the privilege that we're afforded with the, as you say, is like the networks that we've built because of doing the pods and doing the companies around what we've built around those. And it's a good position to be in. And like, it's funny, like I'm almost feeling like a bit of like pressure and guilt at the minute, because like we haven't done a Google event for a little while, and like we're doing what, it's not until September, and like we haven't put any other events together, and I'm sort of like, the space is like the space needs us. And it's like, well, maybe that's a bit too far. Like, I'm sure no one's crying themselves to sleep because Somx hasn't put an event on recently, but at the same time, like I do feel
you're in
like
Australia, and I haven't seen one recently. I love the pictures from the Google events. Those events look wicked, man. Like
they're cool. Yeah, they're cool. They're cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're good fun. Yeah.
Well, we've got our because someone had this idea, which was me, of doing a quarterly virtual summit for Talking Health Tech, and I probably didn't think about the amount of time and effort you need to pull together a quarterly virtual summit that has 12 panels and 40 speakers, and in between doing 2 or 3 episodes a week of a podcast and now producing other podcasts. So that's the 24th of August for our members and those that, so put it in the calendar. That's going to come up soon. Hey, shout out to Samir for sharing the Medicubes podcast link as well. And I guess building on, actually, before we jump to Roy's point, which is, talking about thinking about starting a podcast, and actually tied to, because I've seen a few participants from the, here in Australia, the Australian Clinical Entrepreneurs Program, which was actually inspired by the UK program.
Yeah, Tony Young, yeah.
So I'm a facilitator for the Australian version here in New South Wales, which is kind of cool. And we just hit cohort 2 of that. But to that point that you raised before around, you don't need to build something that's then, to raise $10 million and do 100 million in ARR and all that kind of, like, that's not the goal a lot of the time. And when you're speaking with, it's not always, but there's clinicians that kind of get in the game, and I guess startup founders, but particularly for a clinician who's often come from a space of, getting involved in healthcare to care for patients, and you would know this much better than me as a clinician. But from all the stories I hear and work with, that you get in, you see patients constantly, but then feel like you either are remarkably burnt out and start to feel really bad about not enjoying it and not getting the satisfaction from it, or you feel like you could do more at a greater scale rather than on a one-to-one kind of person level. So, there's some such cool examples like what Roy's working on out of OzCep cohort 1. I know Yoni as well, who's in cohort 2, and a couple others would probably be watching too. That you don't, if you can build something that affects people, but maybe it even just like fulfills that initial reason that you became a clinician in the first place, then that's got to be a good thing.
Agree, mate. Agree.
Yeah. And shout out to those here. Oh, look, Claudia's and you got organizations happening here, so that's
I think it's the 11th, Claudia. I think it's the 11th, but I'll message you after this. I'll let you know.
Yeah, good one. So what else we got going on in the chat? Did we bring anything else that we were gonna? Oh yeah, the podcast question. Sorry, we're gonna come back to Roy's question. We're gonna stay on content creation. I enjoy that. We got so heavy on the interoperability and finance stuff at the start. Maybe it's a nice way to round it out. Get started and don't listen to your first 30 episodes ever again. Just like,
that's
bury them.
I've actually put a disclaimer. Honest to God's truth, I've put a disclaimer on the first 20 episodes that basically just says, like, how you found this, I don't know, but don't judge me. Like, what you want to do is stop this and now add about 100 or 200 to whatever number you wanted to listen and go from there. Like, there's no need to be back here. No one needs to hear this. So yes, I have indeed put that disclaimer on the first 20 episodes. The equipment's terrible. Like, it sounds awful. I don't know what I'm talking about.
People have that urge to go back to the first, after you listen to a few, like, oh, I wonder what it sounded like at the start, and that's what they do.
Yeah, funny. Yeah, funny. No, I agree. Yeah, get started. I think there are things that you can do to. One of the biggest things is that podcasts don't reach past episode. I think the big gates are like episode 6, episode 12, and then 30 or something. Then it's like 1%, then 1%, then another 1% of even those numbers, or sort of something along those lines. But I think it's easy to overthink the purpose of it at the beginning. Because to Pete's point, you're probably not going to get the listeners at that point. It's the same with a YouTube channel. It's the same with any new platform you're going to be on. You're starting from a standing start of 0 listeners, viewers, watchers, readers, etc. And so I wouldn't overthink the purpose, but make it enjoyable. Like, just make it enjoyable for you, and try and set it up so that you win when nobody is listening. That's my big advice, which is make sure that you're getting something from it. So with the HealthTech podcast, it was like, can I just speak to someone interesting from health tech once a week for an hour that I'm sort of punching above my weight, getting them on because I'm giving them an offer to come on a podcast rather than just, can I have a meeting to pick your brain? Like the bane of my LinkedIn inbox.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you say that, because like I was still very much a full-time employee when I started the podcast, and part of my remit was to make new sales to GP clinics.
Interesting.
So the first 20 episodes of the Talking HealthTech podcast does feature a lot of GPs, because it was much easier to say, come and have a chat with me on the podcast. Then I have a chat afterwards. But I don't think I made any sales off the back of it. But
but to also find a way of enjoying it, because then at least you're gonna at least relatively look forward to the next one and the next one and the next one, and you can see those early metrics and wins, and like it's quite nice to build on that momentum. So don't overthink the purpose, but have a reason to do it that means that even if nobody listens to it, you've won. Whether that's because you're happy learning being a host, you want to improve your public speaking, like whatever it is. And do it on a topic or a format or something that you are going to enjoy next time. And if it's easy to get a meeting with someone if you offer them a podcast. And so you can sort of punch up a bit, I think, with the people that you bring on.
And it has that credibility that comes with it too, as long as you keep doing it. And to be fair, like even in the last 5 years, the technology that's been available, like how accessible things and how it's much easier to record and edit, and there's
that's the other side of it, isn't it? I think very practically, get yourself a 50 quid microphone off Amazon and do a recorded Zoom call. That's your MVP for a podcast. Like we can talk about paid platforms like Riverside and stuff afterwards, but do that. If you've got a friend or a co-founder or a co-worker, just have an interesting conversation with them, record it as like a test. Go on what was Anchor or Spotify for podcasters and just upload it there for free, and all of a sudden you've got a podcast on Spotify. It's pretty straightforward.
Give it a crack, and if no one likes it, then you can delete it and pretend it never happened. So that's but stick with it. That's the thing. I can see there's a very long message that's live stream 101 etiquette is not pulling up you haven't read, but I saw your name in there. I guess medical devices, scale of 1 to 10. How good are you at medical devices?
What's my opinion on investments in advanced medical devices? What's the background? Okay. So leave it up. Still in the rabbit hole. Ample room for improvement and innovation. Yeah, right. So this is kind of what I was saying before, which is, okay, we can build new advanced medical devices. Let's say, I know you don't want me to talk about it, Pete, but large language models.
I just thought it was funny that we took it that long. We could definitely talk about it. Yeah.
But let's start here then. So Hugh Harvey and Hardy Health put out a really good blog on this. It was super long, but it was about what would large language models need to do to become medical devices? And that's an advanced medical device. It's software as a medical device, but let's call that an advanced medical device. Well, the first thing is get the bloody thing regulated. Like, get it regulated. Like, make sure it can actually be used, and it's deterministic, and it does what it says it's going to do, and all the regulators are happy with it. You are happy with it, that it's going to deliver what you want. So we can talk about advanced medical devices till we're blue in the face. And like I was saying before, we can push that technology frontier forwards and forwards and forwards and forwards with more and more and more advanced medical device stuff. But to your point about the rabbit hole is, can it actually be bought and used by humans in a hospital and used on them as patients? That is the rabbit hole. So unless we change this, there's no point talking about that. And I think that's the thing. We can get excited about large language models. We can get excited about the potential of everything that they could possibly do for, dare I say the words, if there's anyone from the MHRA, diagnosis and treatment. We could use it for those things, but you look at what Nuance and I think it's Microsoft are doing, like an Epic, and transcribing and summarizing, and then an agent model where that then can feed into, if the clinician reads that summary and action plan, can just hit a button and all of a sudden the blood tests are ordered and everything happens through the large language model agent. So there's things like that become interesting, because I can see that. And I spoke to a guy called Rob Brisk on my podcast, NHS cardiologist, computer scientist, can build large language models and has done, like a hobbyist almost, but works as a I think CTO at a digital health company, but he's bullish on the fact that this will change everything. It just needs to be done properly. And actually, are there use cases where they can be away from patients, like as in facing them, not facing them immediately, but still doing a job? And I think this interesting thing where, imagine being in a 10-minute appointment where you can give your full attention to the person, you can look them in the eye the whole time, knowing, and obvious things aside about like how accurate these things are right now, but imagine if you could have that 10-minute conversation with them, looking them straight in the eye, you could give them your full attention, you can deliver the standard of care that you want to deliver in that time. Heck, the appointment could even be longer because you're saving time because you don't have to write it up. So 15 minutes, 20 minutes of full attention in that consultation. Everything's written, everything can then be checked, and then everything ordered in one click. You don't have to do any of that stuff. All of a sudden, that really starts to change a model of healthcare for me, because that hits me at a pain point that I really felt as a clinician, which was that I was spread too thinly and I couldn't deliver the standard of care that I wanted to. The obvious danger is that if you take that time away from clinicians, from the writing up of stuff and the ordering of stuff, if you don't give it back to them, but instead you give them another patient to see, that's obviously that's the danger, which I could all certainly see us falling into. But yes, Rob Brisky does sound like a weapon, and he is. Encourage you to go to listen to that episode of my podcast. It's like 3 or 4 episodes ago, I think.
Yeah, love it. No, I was just reflecting on when you brought up nuance in particular, and the stuff that Microsoft as well as seen some of the stuff that's happening with EMR data and utilizing GPT-4 and doing it in a way that is, all the ambient stuff, and that's definitely next level. So
it makes me cringe though, man, when you say like putting like patient records into GPT-4. I've just got this image of like a doctor sat at home like copy and pasting from
into the OpenAI website. Yeah,
all of a sudden OpenAI have now got my entire medical history. Like,
when there's its own contained, when you take the thing, not shoving it into the public.
I understand what you're saying.
Just to, I know, but then I don't want to get lambasted for the. There's that too. We have got like a couple of minutes left, but the Claire, appreciate you being here for the whole chat, and shout out to everyone that's kind of hung around and fed us stuff to talk about. But this is kind of to that point that you touched on before, James, around
it's a yes. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And whether or not, even if you could say that clinicians were like really well educated, well, they could be more educated. They could be more educated on the financial viability or the clinical viability or the technical viability, or there's the more educated people are on technology, of course, like an anaesthetist has to learn about the anesthetic machine in order to pass the exams to become an anaesthetist. You have to learn about the physics, the chemistry, everything that goes on in that anesthetic machine. You have to understand, because as a user of that tech, you're now sort of educated and informed and evangelized to know how to manipulate it, how to use it to exactly what you want, etc., etc. Imagine if people knew about AI like anaesthetists knew about an anesthetics machine. Imagine the demand that would create from clinicians. Imagine the drive and the passion that would create to put certain things in place to allow for more things to come in. Imagine, people start to see what that world could be. So rather than fear, it becomes more about acceptance and finding a way. And I think that's why the not only the digital literacy and just getting people able to use it, but I think educating people on it. And it wouldn't have to be everyone. It would perhaps just be a subset of people that self-identify as wanting to be clinician and they can sit as the guardians and the gatekeepers that understand the technology and the market and everything. It's random thoughts.
Dude, you say very smart things. You should have a podcast.
I said markets at the end there and like cringed a little bit. I was like, I've said it again. Like, I don't really know what it means. No. If you say markets enough, it sounds good.
You're so good, right? Though, in terms of that, this is why we talk about digital literacy and stuff. And often we talk about these things as if they're just kind of throwaway lines, and the interoperability point. But what I love about this conversation, James, is you've given it like context, and that's why people should listen to your stuff and follow along. Where should people go? We got to wrap it up because it's nearly bedtime here in Australia. But where, so people check out somx.co. Is that where we go?
Somx.health is a new one. Yeah, we changed our domain. Changed our domain. Our email address is still somx.co.uk, which creates a nightmare. But yeah, somx.health is the website. Somx.co.uk will take you there. It will link there anyway. But yeah, somx.health. That's everything we do with the agency. So healthcare companies, so health tech, biotech, pharma, NHS and public sector orgs. We do all sorts of comm stuff for you. So check that out. If you want to listen to my podcast, it's the Health Tech Podcast. Put that stake in the ground early.
Wait,
an SEO dream.
Yeah. But you have this. You don't have the space anymore. You do have. We talked about this every single time. Is it a space between health and tech, or is it?
No, there is no space. No, there's no space.
Yeah, no space. Yeah, at one point you were, and I was winning
because it was before health tech was a word in inverted commas.
Yeah.
And yeah, health tech pigeon. If you want to get news, the sort of 1 minute roundup of what's going on in the health tech space. If you want to get that, go to www.healthtechpigeon.com or just Google health tech pigeon. And yeah, get the newsletter, and it's a podcast as well, so you can listen to the Health Tech Pigeon podcast where we break down the health tech news every single week.
Yeah, it's a good show. So I've got both of them. I do listen to. I really enjoyed 300. It's been a while since that one. That you're.
Oh yeah. Oh, thanks, man.
That one was a good one. Man. So I'm still listening to it, even so I don't even pretend to listen. It's still on there, and it's a good show. If you are looking for stuff on this side of the globe, go to talkinghealthtech.com if you've not checked it out. I'm trying to drive more traffic to YouTube. So go directly to the YouTube channel, subscribe there, building up a following. I'm on this part. I want to get to 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 watch hours by the end of the year, which is that, then you can say you can monetize your channel and earn, 9 cents a month or whatever it is. So get on there and follow along. There's a great new episode that officially comes out tomorrow, but it's on there live right now. I wanted to make it available. It's a really, I have received some recent compliments about, our creative vlog style intros that I've done. And this one, I might have pushed it too far. I don't know. You go and find out. But there's some crazy cutscenes of me jumping into the future. And I think Claire mentioned the part earlier. So there's a button. I don't know. I
love how you're leaning into this video stuff, man. Like, I love it. It's so good.
Yeah, man. Well, I've seen you've got video episodes now too.
Yeah, we're on YouTube too now. Yeah, Somx is on YouTube. Yeah.
So subscribe to both. I highly recommend everyone follow along everything James is doing, because I'll just steal his good ideas and bring it back to Australia. So
I'm stealing yours now, man, with some of the videos. Yeah.
Mutually stealing. So thank you everyone who's come along on LinkedIn and YouTube. Leave a comment somewhere or share it with someone that you like, and maybe we'll do this again sometime. Thanks so much,
buddy. See you in a bit, man.
Bye.